Okay, hello everybody. First we get to say hello and check how everybody's mic and everything else is doing. You want to all say hi? If you hold down the space bar, you can talk without unmuting yourself.
Hello.
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 Hi there.
Hi. All right. So we're all pretty much, I don't know what our class numbers were, but there's a good number of you. Usually, I've got a whole lot more back and forth, so I'd be asking, what is all your experience in lost wax casting and have you talked to us? I think that will take too long, and it's kind of hard to be like you next because I see Amelia beside me, but I couldn't tell how to tell who next.
I'll keep track of that part.
I know. Okay. So I'm going to start off lost wax casting. Maybe we can get a hands up for those of you that are videoing. How many people know a little bit about lost wax casting? Hands up. Little bits. We like little bits. Okay. How many people have seen it done? Hands up. Okay. Not bad. All right. So I'm going to start at the sort of simple beginnings. We're here to practice carving and playing with wax. And I'm multitasking poorly. Okay. So I'm just going to read over the first part of my notes. If any of you want to check the notes, they are up so you can get them after class, or possibly download them as you're at here. Lost wax process is a fairly simple and universal way of casting intricate objects across the known world. What you can create ranges from delicate and purely decorative jewelry to intricate weapon hilts, votive offerings, and even massive bronze sculptures are all done through lost wax processes. That is true to today. Even with the advent of 3D printing, there's still a lot of 3D printing, rubber molding, and then lost wax casting still happening. In this class, we're going to talk about the basics of how the wax is lost, discuss and practice, more practice, less discuss, a few methods and styles of wax modeling, focusing on beeswax or really whatever you happen to have handy, and we'll field questions when we get to that point about what works and doesn't work. A lot of us will have beeswax, even if it's just for like our sewing kits. Not sure what all you can see. So I've got a camera on my bench and a camera beside my bench. Can I hear from someone if it's easy enough to see things on my bench? Or is it better to go?
That's better.
That's better. Okay. So, examples of carving in beeswax. That's actually two-sided. Do the full-size one that I've never managed to do. And this, the wax gets a bit of a bloom on it, is the model for, I'm going to run you all through a little slideshow showing you guys the process. So hands up again, who has wax near-ish them and some tools to play today? Okay, cool. All right. If you don't worry about it. And, busy your hands however you do on these Zoom meetings. I don't tend to have a Zoom meeting without something to do with my hands. I feel I will not judge anyone for anything. Well, Percy says everyone has to be clothed in some manner, so that's fair. All right. I will share screen and we will do, let's try this. Okay. All right, does everyone see a slideshow scrolling by? Nods, heads up. Bronze head-up brooches. Okay, carving, copying, and casting a series of brooches. This is the fastest way I can get you guys through a process. And since I had already done my homework, here we go. Okay, so here are the extant pieces in the Hedeby Museum. It's in very northern Germany, just south of Denmark. It would have been in Denmark at the time. Well, Hedeby was a settlement from 800 to 1166, I think, when the whole town was raised, I think twice. The inspiration is this one. I'm circling here. Does everybody get to see the circling cursor? Yay. Okay. And there are links if you want to go get lost that away. So you're seeing here many reproductions of the same piece. I'm going to circle in the second row these multi-cross things. You see a bit of sort of zoomorphic knotwork happening in some of the tops, not in the others. Variations, some looking like they are only half complete at the very bottom as well. You can actually see casting imperfections in this one I'm circling here. That area didn't fill. So this is a workshop. They're making multiples of these. They're making many of these. So although we see 2 of these here in 2 different stages, this one honestly looks like it's got fire scale on it. I don't know whether it was simply from how it was in the ground or whether it really hadn't seen any cleaning, because that scale was tough and wouldn't come off. Crucibles and tongs. These are the ones found at that site. I will maybe show you crucibles later that look a little bit more like this, which were the ones I used when I was trying my first bronze casting. Okay. Carving beeswax, if it is cold or cooler, 18 degrees or cooler, is what my shop normally sits at because it's all concrete floors and walls, and it's in the basement. It's fairly easy to carve. In the heat of the summer, it's gummy, it's waxy, and you can't do any nice things with it. It's just, if you would like to model it, so to, you know, sculpt and shape it like Play-Doh through deformation, sure, you can do that in the summer. You may still want to have cold water handy. So I just traced circles and dividers, trimmed out, probably sawed it out with a coping saw, which is like the jeweler's saw, only the teeth on the blade are about 1 millimeter each, so bigger, so they don't get gummed up. I plotted all of the voids in the pattern. You can see on the right with all the holes to get my symmetry as correct as theirs is, because if you go and try and fix the symmetry, they never look right. I start by tracing the lines and then slowly working them deeper. I use gravers, which are engravers, different shapes. Most commonly, I just use a round-nosed one or a 90-degree graver. And just progressing through. Okay. So once I got my master to the point I'm happy, so on the screen bottom right, I put a little bit of wax on the back of it as a handle, and then you use it as a stamp. And if you do this into wet clay, this is how we can do relatively easy, fairly faithful copies. You get about 10% shrinkage, and you can see a little bit of this is just sort of a stoneware clay. It tears a little bit at the edges, so the edges look a little rough. If you use your fingers or a tool and sort of push those edges out, you can always file it back to the true outline. Following that, I did a bunch of copies. You then pour the hot wax in. It shrinks a fair bit. You can see from the first one poured to the last one poured, last one's still liquid. If you wanted to do what's called flush casting, you would wait maybe another 30 seconds until that white rind came in to the thickness you wanted. If you were to then lift up that whole bar and tip out the wax, you would have a relatively hollowed out object, which can save you some work later, lightens the piece, and is required in some types of casting like the big turtle brooches, which I can show you later. So you can see the original down below and a bunch of copies. I made, that looks like more than a dozen or so copies that I was happy enough with to wash off. From them, they then get cleaned up. The one with my thumb and finger is on is to show that I then hollowed out the backs by hand, because these aren't particularly thick, but I did want them to be somewhat lighter. Attaching sprues, which is the gate through which the metal is poured into the mold. And here are two different styles of setting the mold. The ones on the left, you can see the lugs, and this will be bent to be the hook for the pin findings. And that is a modern sprue base. That's rubber. And this is the sprue in its entirety is sort of what I'm circling. On the period style casting, the molds are pressed, the models are pressed firmly into the clay. You can see the sprues that I attached there. They just make my life easier. My life easier. Then these molds are put together. I did a number of castings. I found for myself, because I wasn't using the cob mixture, having molds that separated into two halves made my life a whole lot easier. And I just wired them together after they've been fired to pour the metal back in. So some period sort of style flasks, appropriate to the time and place. We've got lots of broken mold pieces. These are the modern ones. They go within a steel flask. The steel flask is then filled with a plaster investment. They're all sent to the kiln, in this case up to just shy of 1300 degrees Fahrenheit, stepping up at different spots slowly because ceramics don't like certain temperature changes, and neither does plaster. That melts out the wax. All of this brings you to, we have now lost the wax. So in this picture, there's no wax. These have been wired back together. I ran the kiln back up to casting temperature for bronze, or near about a couple hundred degrees over it. These will all be cast in different methods. So these were simply, these molds that I'm circling here were stood so that the top where you pour the metal up is upright. I usually brace them in a little jar filled with sand. So any bronze that gets poured over, I just pick up, throw in the pickle pot, and it gets used again. So there's two casts there. And then the centrifugal casting machine is cropped out here, but you can see the flask. This is the crucible. There's an arm and there's a counterweight that is about here. It is wound up, it's a spring. You drop the pin, the spring lets go. All of the energy that went into winding it throws the metal into the mold, and it spins around and around, and it applies centrifugal force to force the metal from the crucible, into the mold and into the piece.
Orla, we have one question.
Shoot.
What happens to the wax in the kiln?
It vaporizes eventually. This is probably this same flask. You dunk the tail end in water once the button has cooled and is no longer glowing red. And the plaster explosively and excitingly blows away into the water. And this is it slowly being revealed. And I have to move your windows because I can't describe it here. There we are. Okay, in this picture on the right, that's better. We'll go down. Okay, top row are all cast in the clay. There were problems, obviously. I think about half of them were mine. I'll go over that in the casting class. Bottom row, these two here with the nice rounded screws, they were simply gravity poured into flasks. None of that spring wound casting. So that's simply gravity poured. So the problems here is air is not escaping the mold properly. And the problems here specifically, I should have made it so the back would face up. these guys poured nicely. Plaster appears solid, but it has lots of room for air and gas to escape because it is entirely porous. And these ones with the very flat buttons on the sprue, those were centrifugally cast. They all worked up nicely. This one had a flux inclusion here, where a little bit of the flux got thrown. So in the gravity cast, most of the flux sits on the top and pours in last. In this case, a little bit of the flux got thrown into the mold and spun around here while this was still liquid. So that casting is no good. Cleaning them up, sanding, polishing, all that other fun stuff. That's all a different adventure, but they all worked out pretty well. Okay, I will stop the share unless there's anything someone wants to see again in that sort of carousel. All right. Okay, so hello to, there's a few new names there I have not seen, because I have been on another screen. There's my workbench. Okay. So is it pinned to me, or is the workbench also visible?
So it's visible just a little further. Put your hand further. Put your hand further into, now it's gone. Bring your hand towards you. There. Closer to your desk.
Okay.
Closer to
Okay, no,
there's the boundary.
Hold on. Lady Sky, do you know that I'm twice in there?
You're which?
I have a mobile phone that is also participating in the class.
Okay. Which is the mobile phone?
Should also reach Orla.
Okay.
Would
you like me to make that the spotlight video?
Yes, let's switch that one over.
Let's try that. Okay. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
All right. Put my apron on because I don't love picking things up all the time. And we will do a little bit of show and tell, and then sort of field some questions about what people might want to carve or make, or things like that. What we got here? So there. Oh, let's see. It is almost too bright here. And this is why I went with pictures. Anyways, big brooch. I was talking about how they have to be poured out to get this shape. This one was made from a mold and poured out. Similarly, there's one that has not been cleaned up properly yet. They are a dream project because currently at piece I'm trying to do is just a little over 11 centimeters. Most of my gear is not built for anything near this big, but they're fun to try and carve. This is the master form. It is simple, it's solid, but it's the shape I want, plus shrinkage. And this is the one that gets pressed into the wax, or into the clay. Squished into clay, gets it out of clay, and then these are poured in. Poured in, wait till it starts to go white around all the edges, tip the whole thing, pour the wax out, and then begin cleanup. Usually when we do the wax carving class, I have taken a sheet pan, I've melted you a whole bunch of chunks like this, broken it up, and you can get to make something on that. A lot of people, I think the easiest way to start is, something like this. It's very low relief. It's mostly drawing and repeatedly drawing and overdrawing on the piece using a variety of tools. Tools we tend to use, I tend to use all the time. First off, I don't have to worry about this candle blowing off out in the picnic shelter. You can't see it, but it's lit. We now have live fire. Yay! Tools I use the most. This is a scribe, three-sided scraper. And this is really good because trying to use files on wax usually ends with a file coated in wax. Whereas using this tool, I can take material away. See that curl? And nothing gets gummed up. I can do it slower and do a rounded edge. And it gets a little gummed up on the tool and you just scrape it off the tool. In my case, I use the edge of the bench. Oh, there's a lag, but there we are.
What's that called again?
This is usually called a three-sided scraper. And this is my big one. And I've had it since I was a student, so many years. I have a much smaller one. Oh, let's see if we get it focused. There we go. That I made. This used to be a burr, and I put 3 sides onto it. You can show it on point. Nope. And this is for finer work and for getting in, and it does a darn good job on wax. I am turning it, so I got my finger holding the top loosely, but pushing down. And if I turn the tool, my thumb pushes it, my fingers pull back, my thumbs push it, fingers pull back, and that, folks, is a very fast way to put a hole through a piece of wax. Can I say it feels very weird not hearing any of you? All right, so those are things I use very, very often. Sorry, Scott? No, it's me? Okay.
That wasn't me.
Okay.
I was saying we could chime in for the oohs and ahs.
I'll take it. All I hear is crickets, and I don't even hear them because I've got earphones on. Like, the room is very quiet, and I'm not looking at your faces, so I have no idea.
Do you want us to unmute so we can be more noisy?
I think it could probably be noisy occasionally, and it would feel less haunted. I'm just gonna say it's how I feel. It's silly, but there we are. And I'm gonna switch mine so that I look to the rest of all of you. There you are.
So if you choose to unmute, that's entirely up to you. I won't do it for everybody. You have to do it for yourself, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
I like your big scraper. That's pretty awesome that you've had it for so long.
Yep, and it's never gonna die. So I mean, the whatever, I don't know, $5-10 I paid for it as a student. I think it's a little crooked now. I don't know. That's either me sharpening it poorly or I don't know, using a scraper for a chisel or something.
Where would you get something like that?
Typically, the easiest place to get things like this right now are from XIII, Canada, because they ship fairly reasonably, and they don't require any particular credentials. So they're not like, are you a teacher? Are you a student? Are you a tradesperson?
Sorry, what was the name of the place?
XIII, GESSWIEN. I'm probably spelling it wrong, but I can link it later.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay.
GESSWEIN. I can link the URL in the chat.
Perfect. And while we're speaking of them and things you can buy, if you like wax carving and want to do wax carving for jewelry, the modern stuff I use is this. And you can buy a box of it, and it's all in different size slices. Totally not going to set the box on fire. Thin slices. And you will get a lot of projects out of many little pieces here. There we go, contrast. And so I use that for most of my carving of modern pieces. When I'm doing period pieces, I tend to try and use the beeswax or something else.
We have another question regarding a source to order beeswax. Is the beeswax, like, is there a specific characteristic or descriptor we're looking for when we're ordering the beeswax, and where do we get it?
No specific characteristics. Cleaner is better. We had an apiary in London, and that's where I got a lot of mine. And then Lady Rose at some point attended class, and in lieu of class fees, hooked me up with a whole bunch of beeswax. So I haven't needed it in an awfully long time. I happen to know that there are some beekeepers in the kingdom. They might be worth giving a nod or a poke to Tamara, Penda and Sibylla, or Joffer, or why can't I remember John's other name? Anyways, check local, see what there is, because if it's a little dirty, let's see if we can show this. So it looks a little dirty on the backside here. Any of the dirt and muck tends to fall to the bottom. So it's really not a big issue to scrape off an area and come down to some clean material. Is it critical in the long run? No, but sometimes when you're carving, if a little flake or, you know, bee leg or whatever's sticking out, that's going to be annoying. But, you know, perfectly clean on the far side. And to either be drawn on, or if you have a really dirty candle, you can lay down sort of a layer of soot and scratch into it, and then it's really easy to see your pattern. I have no such muck coming off my candle. It's nice and warm. So no specific places to get the beeswax. Wherever you can will probably do. I would kind of, the frugal part of me says, mercy me, don't actually buy beeswax candles. Find someone selling it as, you know, you don't even need cosmetic grade, just something to crafters. Yeah. Tools that I use a lot. Gravers I talked about. This is one. All right. Contrast. All right, so this is an engraving tool. This one's a quick change one because I have so many that then I only need 2 handles, and I have more than a few engravers there.
You got a couple.
I've got a couple.
You got a couple.
I have a couple because I really don't like sharpening my engravers, so I'd like to get through most of the piece before I have to resharpen them. But gravers are good because if I want to carve, how about I can get a pen to work on this? Yeah, so if I want to make a smiley face here, you know, got one googly eye.
Are you gonna have to toss anything there?
What's that?
Sorry, someone came in to talk to me without realizing.
Yep. I dig it. I dig it. That's why I'm a floor away from my tiny human. But they're good for doing the line work. I'm not going to go over that one, but we'll go over this one. So going down and making lines deeper. Let's see if that's closer. Can I get to my camera this way? How is that visualizing for anybody here?
Looks good.
Yeah.
And because I do a lot of interlaced patterns. This one is called a round graver. So it is basically shaped like, I got a big marker. This will do. So the very front of the graver on a round graver is shaped like that. Does that read? So I use that as a round graver. And they're really just referring to this bottom bit, because that's typically what's doing most of the cutting. And the one I use next most is square graver, and the cutting area on that is the part I drew in black there. Because the problem with files is they will gum up. So blade, if you get a bunch of beeswax just stuck to it, you just scrape it off and keep on going. Other handy and simple tools when you're doing carving. I said these guys have a bit of a bloom on them, which, you know how chocolate will get that thing that never happens because chocolate always gets eaten at our house. It's when it loses moisture. And so you get a bit of surface crystallization on it. But if you take a cloth, and you can use this in the later stage of cleaning things up, you can burnish it. You will end up getting wax all over the cloth, but it can get your, finish off and rub outs and sort of tool marks, giving you slightly better looking surface. Okay. Other things commonly used, dividers. These are adjustable. I turn the knob and it changes the spacing. Farther and farther apart for making circles. Templates can be nice. See if I do this. And then repurposing tools, like small screwdrivers. Those of you with glasses will be familiar with some of these small fiddly little screwdrivers. They do a good job of replacing the gravers, or you can do the same thing. And if you hold it, you can use it to make lines, dig deeper. You can use the corner of it to scoop out areas. And then you just clean off the beeswax and keep going. If you are into sculpting, I find very often you end up having to warm it up between your hands, starting with small pieces. People with cold hands, I'm sorry, good luck. You start with very thin pieces. This is maybe 3 millimeters between my fingers. This is fairly easy to get warm enough that, say I wanted to make, my written example is usually, okay, so you want to make a snowman, so you're going to roll up 3 balls. You're going to need a round disc for the bottom of the top hat, and you're going to need a cylinder for the top part of the top hat. And then you would weld them all together. But since this one's roughly triangular, let's see. And so it doesn't take much warming up until it is possible to bend it round without breaking it. All right. And the other thing I tend to use when I am doing a lot of attaching things, I'll have a very cheap soldering iron. It has a small rheostat in it, meaning it can be set from 200 to 400 degrees. That little wheel there. It has never been used for soldering. It's only been used for wax and other things like that. Plug it in. It overheats some of my waxes a little bit, so I end up pulling it out and unplugging it and doing that. But it makes short work of if I wanted to weld this seam together. It would melt the wax, you would squeeze the piece together, hold it together until this solidifies, or use something to bind it together till it solidifies, and then you would have that seam all closed. Okay. So far, where does everyone want to go from here? I've done most of the show and tell, and now it's a question of what you guys would like to work on.
Okay, so we,
So,
Carly, sorry.
so I just have. Should I bother trying with the wax, or should I later melt them into the flat like you have?
Amelia, you broke up midway, but I'm assuming you said you just have candles that are whole to work from? Yeah. You can work with them. You would need a saw, the coping saw I spoke of earlier, with nice big blades, as opposed to the jeweler's saw with the nearly non-existent. I'm not even sure you guys can see that blade. So yes, you can melt it, or you can do where you make, so these were some droplets I poured out of my candle so I could get my candle going. It is also possible to light the candle, wait for it to have a pool of wax, pour said pool of wax onto parchment paper is a good solution, paper, a metal sheet that you can bend because it'll pop off. Something to make that motion make sense. It'll help get it off the surface. So you can sort of pour a puddle the shape that you would like to start in roughly. And what's nice is that when you start out, they're usually not too thick. This little blobble is, say, I could actually answer that, probably about 2-3 millimeters, because they want to settle down. It is 3.5 millimeters. So it's a really good size for starting to do, say, a pendant or something like that. I'm holding a nurdle, too tiny to show, but.
We have a question from Curly as well. She asks, can you reuse the plaster mold for another casting?
Nope. No, it only gets to go once. However, you can sometimes use the ceramic mold for another. I say this because I've got one, and the piece just fell out of this. So in theory, this one could be heated up and run back through the kiln. Most of them end up broken into many pretty bits. The plaster ones, they end up as a giant bucket full of plaster that I then have to appropriately get rid of later. The plaster molds are one time only. If the wax does not turn out, if the metal does not cast properly, she's gone. My favorite part about all of jewelry is wax casting or wax carving. Casting is, you know, it's fun and exciting. I like the wax carving. Sometimes it's really lucky because I end up having to do it more than once. A while back I did belt buckle. Whoop. And I ended up making 3 waxes with pattern transferred onto it, and it took 2 of them to get it to cast properly.
Someone has a young child in the background. If that's you, if you could mute.
I thought I was muted. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened.
No, that's okay.
I thought I was.
I was imagining it's not Iris.
Well, I mean, you might hear a thump, 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 but that's mostly all you're going to hear from her from upstairs, unless there's a whole lot of giggling, and then it could be her too. She doesn't get to come down to the studio. So we've talked about sort of subtraction. We've talked about the addition, like making a snowman, deformation. I do know people who like to sculpt, like I was doing with the cone. Just going over my notes to see what I've missed. Are there any parts of the process people want to hear more about?
Are there any protection equipment items that you recommend?
While just doing the carving, I've got a leather apron, which is, conveniently fire safe and keeps my clothes from being too stained. Appropriate fire safety, hair back. There are a few things later in the process where you need a whole lot more gear for. I've got a full face mask. I've got a respirator for when I'm investing plaster. The fumes off of beeswax are pretty moderate. It's always advisable if you're doing this in camp to be very, very wary of live flame and canvas. But those are sort of normal concerns. When the burnout's happening and you're running a hearth, there's all kinds of concerns, most of them alleviated by being outside. But all the fire safety rules apply, and hot things can hurt you. So has anyone started working on anything?
I'm trying to make a rose, and I'm wondering, because I was playing with that thin piece.
Yep.
Can I actually attach petals to this, or do I have to carve them out?
No, you can absolutely, and a rose would be a good thing for petals. So I've got one between my thumb and forefinger right now that I've been squishing and keeping warm. So if you were to make a stem, so if you were to take a little bit of wax and roll up a stem, or have something just to attach them to, you'll see it with cake makers. These are too quick for now. Or if you've got something to start on, it lets you start the center.
It's like a flat, like a Tudor rose kind of idea.
Oh, you still can. Do you want it to be still sort of dimensional?
Yeah.
Like because Tudor is the two roses nested inside each other. So yeah, you can make the individual petals, and they're shaped roughly like a heart.
Okay.
So I'm sort of forming up a.
The petals are like heart shaped, and they kind of curl around on the.
Yep.
On the edges.
And they get so they curl into and over, basically like sort of. I have no contrast for you here. There.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, you could absolutely make 5 of those for the inside, and then 5 of those for the outside, and then take either what I tend to use when I am, welding small parts together, is I will often use a scalpel. I should say this. Here's one safety thing I should say. I use scalpels a lot because they're sharp, and my parents worked in healthcare, so we had good access to them. Now I get better ones from my suppliers. When putting scalpel blades on, pliers are the thing. No fingers should be near the sharp end. They are designed for cutting people. But I tend to be particularly mean to them, and I use them because they're very, very thin, and I'm quite comfortable with them, and you can use them heated up to melt the 2 layers together if you're not using a hot point like the soldering iron.
Okay.
If you are using a candle, the other thing you might be able to use is if you take a piece of wire, not choose the silver, cleaned up. Now there's no fun wire everywhere. Okay, so if you take a piece of wire, you have nothing else, and you can make a little bit of a handle by making a loop. Then you've got something with a little bit of reach, holding the candle to heat up, remembering that where you set it down, that hot metal doesn't look hot, and to, you know, only touch the cool end. Oh, I'm gonna make another puddle. My poor little candle. This was once a lovely wolf candle. It has made many things in the years since. But you can use that here. I'll end you. And you see the end getting all sooty, and it will put soot into your piece. That doesn't really cause any particular problems casting, but then you can use it to weld your petals together at the center.
So basically using it as a little iron.
Yep, little tiny hot iron.
Cool.
So sometimes the very simplest tools will absolutely work.
Who doesn't have a piece of wire lying around?
Well, apparently I didn't for a second. I was like, what? Today I cleaned, darn it. All right, we'll let that pass. And then absolutely, when you get to the end, you can even do things like, usually if there's the roses, tudor roses are seeded. So if you take very small little bits, like half the size of a grain of rice, and you roll it between your fingers, you know, everything you learn in kindergarten, you'll use in crafting. So, you know, if you can do it to Play-Doh, you can probably do it to beeswax. You just have to, as I say, have warm hands, or, you know, a friend with warm hands who's trapped with you. I mean, enjoying their quarantine with you. I like the term of calling them our quarantines. We wouldn't do it with anyone else. I, to this day, still use a lot of beeswax, and I just mold it for my sprues. So, as I say, the parts to attach. Because it's the quickest thing to model the size I need, because the size of the sprue and the shape it is important, and how it attaches in. And then it's usually quite easy because the beeswax will melt at a much lower temperature than any of these waxes. So even if I mess something up, I will not damage my original model. So if I don't like where I've put the sprue, I just let it cool off, scrape off the beeswax, give it a bit of a buff on a cloth, take off any extra, and then put it in a different spot. Who else is playing around and is having fun?
I have a spruing question.
Yep.
So I've always found not the sprues to be intimidating, but just also worrying about air vents.
For like large objects?
Well, do you find that with the smaller things that the air vents are not necessary, or just only with larger, like when I was doing more bronze casting sculptures?
Typically, you won't see a lot of air vents in jewelry casting. And here, we have time. When does this class end, Gaia?
It ends at 6:30. We
Okay.
have an hour and a half. So 5 minutes before the end, I'll give you the red flag.
Beauty. I can show you some examples once I bring them up. Just a sec. Okay, I should be able to do this. Just a sec. Going to share screen again and show. All right, do we all see a bottle of acetone and some other things?
Yep.
Beauty. Let's see if it will let me scroll through. There we go. User errors, guys. Okay, I'm going to scroll ahead because the answer is in my last wax casting class. And since we have time and everybody's sort of just playing, you just saw a whole lot of wax carvings in fast forward. Okay, sprue. Right. So here is some modern sprueing. Really simple piece, simple shape. Really, I just need a nice heavy sprue. Goes directly to, there's no real heaviest part of this piece. So it goes to a place that's convenient and not in the way. Go to a direction, it's attached to sprue base, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this one is more complicated in two ways because it has a heavy area here and a heavy area here, and it was a master, and I did not want to carve that piece off. So over sprued a lot, but to a place that was really easy to clean up. So it's really easy to cut off, it's easy to file, no problem. Really, I will remember which way to go. Tilted a little bit back just so the air bubbles don't adhere. Same thing to this piece. There's probably better ways to screw it, but as I say, my systems are all geared to smaller things, so I ran into space constraints with this project. Where's Charlie? There's Charlie. Okay, there's the back of Trinovancia's all-terrain unicorn with horns, wings, tail. The tail was maybe not the best place. There was no other good place for it, but even with all these open work in these areas, no vents are required. You're not relying on gravity, usually, so you don't have to worry about any areas being trapped with air causing sort of positive pressure problems.
But that's if you're using a centrifuge, right?
It is, but even like in small volume things, the plaster still has enough space in it for a lot of the air that's displaced by the metal.
Right.
I'm
But
going
if
the wrong
you're
way.
using the clay, the more
If you're
pure
going the clay, I have had
you run more risks because there's nowhere really for the air to.
absolutely. I've had endless trouble trying to cast in clay. I assume I am the problem. No, I assume the problem is I haven't been using a cob mixture and my clay is too dense, even the clay I dig out. There's some PPE. See, I wear it. Weighing out metals. I'm going ahead because when I get to making the multiples, I don't do venting, but sprues do get a lot more complicated when I'm doing a lot. Hey, there's casting. All right, modern casting. Those are the flasks invested. They haven't been through the kiln yet. By the next shot, they're in the kiln. I'm preheating the metal. Put the flask in place. There is the pin. There's the counterweight. That is the pivot point, and there's a spring underneath in that black thing down below. And bam, pull the pin, drop it, and step back. It does occasionally spatter. And you can see the red there is all the metal has gone out of the crucible into the mold and it's sitting in the bottom, which is good. Okay. I have to go through a lot of these, but when we get to the multiples, almost there. Milady of the Hedge, can you say your name, your new name for me again?
Morwenna?
Moana? Thank you. Hey.
Morwenna, yay.
I like it.
It's a great name.
Thank you.
Moana. All right, so I've got multiples. So I've got to get these multiples. Oops. Hope I'm not making you all dizzy. So how do I get all these multiples cast? I'm not casting them one at a time anymore. I want to cast them together. So this is where you get into trees. I do a fresh weight on the individual models and we start building more complex trees. And some of them work better than others. This style worked really well because this is being vacuum cast, which is gravity plus vacuum. So having the extra connections means that if from the base, the metal does not all flow and fill all of here, it may well go up here, along there, and back down. So you've got less likelihood of failures. They still happen, but by putting those extra connections, it works better.
Alyssa has a question. She's asking if could you please teach a casting class specifically on using a master to create silicone molds?
I can. I'm going to talk about the silicone molds in the casting class, but sure, I can add it to next school's plan. Or, I don't know, we're all locked in. In theory, we have extra time. I don't because I'm a parent, but...
Is that the casting class tomorrow at 1 p.m.?
It is. And you're seeing much of the slideshow go by and fast forward. There we are. There,
She says she will be there.
Yay! And so by having them interconnected, they're not air vents, but they're an additional reservoir for metal. They help solve the, I had issues with Charlie's wingtips not filling the first time I tried casting them. I had issues with some of these, I think I had issues with some of the outside slugs not filling properly on like the loops. So by adding an additional way for metal to move around all of the objects within the plaster, you limit your failure rate.
Okay.
So here's some of them cast. They're all over the bench, but you can see they're all tied together at weird and wonderful spots. But no, venting is really not done in at least under like the 3-inch time scale or space. There we go. There's it's all shiny.
So pretty.
Yeah, it's all pretty. I only have 4 more to do.
Good thing we're in a quarantine.
If only I wasn't also trying to be a teacher to my 4-year-old. It'd be great.
I think there's a few of us who hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. You know, she's great because, you know, she's in JK and her teacher was like, yeah, we don't expect anything out of you guys. You guys will be fine. They've got 2 years to do kindergarten. So I'm not trying to teach a kid math that I can't wrap my brain around. So I'm doing great.
Oh God, don't teach your kid math or spelling.
I'm not allowed to, really. It's okay. I understand. So who else has projects or are playing with things if they've got questions or want to do show and tell? I can't be the only one doing show and tell.
I wrecked a candle to melt the wax into a little basin, and I'm waiting for it to cool.
Nice.
That's all.
I cooled mine down with an ice block because I did the same thing.
Yes. I have like a little freezer frog that was my go-to if I was going to need one. I don't know. I love beeswax. I could seriously, I mean, I'm not saying I'm huffing my studio materials. I don't do that often, but beeswax would be the exception.
Here's a question. Could you like use this technique to make like a little helmet for a tin soldier?
No reason you couldn't.
My cousin found an old tin soldier set that my grandfather had, and we're restoring it for him for his 80th birthday.
Yep. You could, absolutely. And you can, I mean, a helmet has a hollow on the inside as well. So you might want to do an investment style casting, but you wouldn't need special plaster. You could do it with plaster of Paris, and so long as all the water had left and it spent some time in your oven drying out, you could pour pewter into that sort of a mold and likely have it work. Okay. You'd want to try a few and have like a few set up and ready to go. And yeah.
All right.
Where did you get your metals for casting?
Most of the metal I get for casting, if they're precious metals, I get them here in Canada from a company called Umicore. They used to be Imperial Smelting and Refining, and they're in, I think of it as North Toronto, near-ish the airport, if I remember right. I could have it wrong now. So Umicore for things like silver, gold, For bronzes and brass bronze and nickel silver, which is white brass, usually I get it from Rio Grande from the States. So whenever I'm ordering other things from them, I tend to add a pound of whatever color bronze I'm low on.
Anayanka shared a file and asked if it is too complicated. I'm going to, do you want me to share my screen so you can see it?
I should be able to see the chat if I go to it. The answer is it's Anayanka, and probably no, not for you eventually. But I'll look at it.
Also, does anyone know how to make the screen bigger again? I've minimized it and I don't know how to work this.
The box of corner pieces, if you tap on that, it should enter full screen again.
Mm-hmm.
Did that work?
Yeah, no, that's not too complicated. Yep, that worked.
Alyssa says go for it.
You can do it.
Anna, I've looked at your calligraphy work, your illumination work. That I think that is well within your your ability.
Thank you.
Should we be careful about making the walls too thin when we make a wax shape that has like a hollow on the inside?
When you're making a piece to cast, so if you're thinking of doing it in tin or a lead-free pewter, really, it's very, very fluid material. So long as it's not under about 1 millimeter, it's fine. If you're thinking what would be too thin, say the thickness of like a credit card would probably be a little too thin, but it probably would still cast. It's just if you had sort of a long, thin area where you're trying to get a lot of metal through a very thin area, the far end might not show.
I have a question about investment.
Yep.
I'm using modern investment, so nice and smooth, no clay. I'm having trouble getting my investment into the smaller crevices without air bubbles.
Okay.
So I don't know if it'll show. I've got an example.
Yep.
So this is what I do.
Okay. I'm going to make you big.
You can see my screen.
I can see a little. Let's fix this. All right.
What the?
Nope, it just doesn't want to let me. All right, I can see it well enough. Yep.
Okay.
So you've got a big-ish
So
piece.
that's one of my pieces after it's all done.
Yep.
So I'm finding, so this is one of my new waxes that I'm trying to do. And I'm finding that getting the investment in the bail hole.
Yep.
Every single time I've done it, as a single loop bail, which is too fragile for the glass, it's okay. But as soon as I do a double loop bail, it fills with, it gets air bubbles in the investment, and then there's glass filling the whole hole. So.
Okay. The usual solution, if I have a piece that I really don't want to clean the air bubbles out of, see glass. Oh my God, that's so cool. We'll leave that aside. A paintbrush.
Yeah, I can't clean the air bubbles out. It's got to cast the way I want it to be.
No, yeah, I get that. I work with enamels, and even that has me screaming obscenities at class. So yeah, you're going to want to, when the investment is being put in, so you're going to want to ensure that you're pouring through the hole. Do you vibrate your flask? What do you use for flasks for things that big? Are you still using like a steel container with a rubber base of some sort?
No, I just use a Rubbermaid because not all that has to go away. It sits in the kiln for about 5 days.
Okay. So yeah, you would pour the investment in. Your investment is, I assume, sort of, how do I usually describe it, like mushroom soup texture. Relatively pourable, not too chunky. Yep.
But for glass casting, your first layer is the very smooth investments, and you have to have it thin enough that it gets into everything. and then you just keep pouring it over and over until everything coats, and then you do
Okay.
you do layers. And so your last casting is actually rough. It's got inclusions and stuff in it so that it doesn't all crumble in the kiln after being at 2000 degrees for 5 days.
Okay, yeah.
So
All
it's
right.
not sitting in something that I can just sit there and vibrate. It's like you're constantly just pouring it on until it solidifies.
Okay, and so when you're pouring it in, are you using a paintbrush to ensure that the first sort of loose layers are making it in and coating the inside pretty well?
Yeah, but then I end up with the air bubbles. It's the after that, like as it starts solidifying.
Okay. When I have air bubbles on jewelry pieces, it's usually pretty predictable. They are where, if I'm vibrating the piece, where air bubbles will rise to and get trapped. So a lot of times the angle of the piece is critical. So here's a ring. So here's a ring. If I were to cast it, I'll show it to you guys, straight up and down, air bubbles are going to want to catch where I'm pointing there on that inside ring. If I tilt it just a little, they will be able to work their way out. So I don't know if you have the option of tilting your model so that those areas, if they were likely to trap an air bubble, the air bubble has an easy means of escape. Short of that, we can trade more images to take a look at it.
I'd have to pull out all the plaster and.
No, yeah, I understand. So it's like, I'm like, it should just be jewelry only giant and waiting days for glass to melt into a shape. I've seen it and I'm like, mind blown. My casting is quick and easy compared to that.
This one I did in a class because I had an access to a really big kiln. Kiln I have, the biggest I can do is about that big.
Yeah. Okay.
Like this will be the biggest piece I can ever cast in my kiln because it takes so much investment. So yeah. So yeah, now I'm having trouble there.
Okay, with glasswork. So if I was doing a piece where the hinge work was really critical, I can put graphite pins in where I need the hinges to be hollow. Will something like that survive the 2000 degrees?
I'll have to play. Graphite will last that high, but glass sticks to everything else that's hot.
Okay, so that's the thing. Like if you use graphite, you can use a graphite slug pin to go through that hole to occupy that space with it extending. So if, out on either side of where you want it to be, so that the plaster around it will grab onto it and it won't move. And so that's a way where, as I say, if you're doing hinges and you really need the holes of the hinges to stay hollow, that's a trick that's sometimes done in really small hinges when they're being cast.
I'll see if I can find some graphite then.
Yeah, that would be my only sort of workaround. Yeah, you don't want to have to drill that out.
And glass won't drill out.
No, I mean, like, I'm like, my brain goes like, well, I guess diamond burrs maybe, but the failure rate would be high.
So Orla, would the graphite pins work with a regular metal lost wax casting?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. I mean, there are lots of jewelry styles right now that use cast in place for gemstones, because you can do sapphires, rubies, well, any of the corundums, so sapphires, rubies, and diamonds can all be cast in place. So they preset the stones in the wax and then cast the metal around them, which is just crazy bedlam as far as I'm concerned.
Wouldn't the heat destroy the gemstones?
Nope. You have to be very cautious on your temperatures, but all of those gemstones can withstand soldering heat, which is higher than our casting heat. Well, no. they will all put up with it within certain ranges. They're very, very durable stones, heat-wise anyway. Most stones you cannot do that, but those special stones, yep. When I'm doing soldering, repairs, retipping, they're all done with the stone in place. Now I'm doing rose petal leaves.
Make me a rose.
No, that's your own darn job, darling. Now, if you bring your made rose to my studio, then you can make a rose.
Would it be crazy for me to try to make a harpy?
Crazy, but as always, possible. Mm-hmm.
Is there an appropriate size I should be aiming for?
Well, for my setup, my flasks are 2.5 by 2.5 inches, roughly. So no more than 1.5 inches wide and no more than 2 inches tall would be ideal. Otherwise, I have to pull out the bigger flasks and we have to vacuum cast. Are there any other projects that people are thinking of maybe doing in future that I can help out with?
Where is your studio, Orla?
My studio is in sunny St. Thomas in the fine Shire of Trinidad and Nova, and it's in the downstairs of my house. I have half of my house, whose basement is all a variety of studio crafts. Get out of my way of my camera. There's the kiln under the electrical box there, like you do. Polishing machine. I'm in the way of, see if we can do this, rolling mill. Centrifugal casting is in this far back corner, that aluminum looking cylinder. Ooh, backwards is tricky. Vacuum casting machine. The said giant bucket of plaster I actually have to get rid of soon. And there's some, we cannot do this, lapidary gear hiding behind the grinder and banners right now.
Neil says hello.
Hello. Hey, I get to see the group chat now.
Orla, would you consider going to a Known World Metal and Glass Symposium and teaching something there?
Yeah.
In a future time when not all our classes are online?
In a future time when we get to do the things with the people and see the things you're doing, only I see busy hands and I'm like, I can't see what you're doing.
I hear you.
Oh, I like this. Okay.
She's looking at us.
I'm snooping. I'm snooping. Well, you're all like this big on the screen. I miss Fool, but we will do Fool however we have to do it. It will happen. It's my very favorite. For those who are from far and away, you should come far and away to this event. It is worthwhile. It was one of my first events and made me lose my marbles and join the SCA. And
oh yeah.
It's all been good since then.
Yeah. Last year was my first event ever, and probably the reason I stayed.
It's something and a half. My campmates usually bring me food and tell me to go for walks, because I usually bring far too much of my studio and take over a corner of a picnic shelter for the weekend. been doing glass past years, but I did not think that would, it's not as much fun just watching someone do glass, the enameling. So I'm like, well, we'll go back to carving. Everybody, Skadians all have wax at home, right?
Okay, we only have 13 minutes left, folks.
Yep. Throw me questions. You can be totally off topic now. I have run out of the okay, now go play, portion of this this class.
How hard would it be to make a tiny chess set like this?
How hard? Well, as hard or as easy as you want to make it. There were chess sets where the pawns are, sort of simple carved lumps, and then there's the Lewis chessmen.
This would be more for like, this isn't supposed to be like a playable chess set. It's just supposed to be like a little, sort of like a charm, but like a charm bracelet type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're just supposed to be set, like set on the board. They don't actually move.
Yeah, I mean, wax is perfect for modeling figurines. Casting them is not a great challenge. It's something that you sort of have to work up to and do simple designs, practice casting simple designs, and then more complex, and you get to learn what works well and what is likely to give you trouble. As I say, there are many waxes that I lose forever and don't necessarily have a piece of jewelry at the end of it. It usually seems to happen when you're on a deadline, but that's, just my experience.
We have a question from Alyssa, who incidentally is from Avacall. She's asked, if you are comfortable with it, could you please share your contact information for those of us who would like to take more classes from you or follow up with questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I can toss it into the chat room so it is available for everyone. If you go to the class notes that are on the full website, I think I put it under my name at the top of the document as well. Look at that, that looks more or less right. That'll reach me. I like email better than Facebook, but I can be found on Facebook, Shannon Dobbs. You'll also see Orla in brackets because Facebook has made it really hard to learn everybody's SCA names and or remember them.
And you're an active member of the Kingdom of Eldamere Metalworkers and Glassworkers Guild as well on Facebook.
I am part of all of those things, active. Oh, I try. I try.
The Moneyers Guild.
The Moneyers Guild I'm active on. I'm like, I smashed a thing. But yeah, no, I've been casting simple bio stuff. I started casting in high school because I had a really weird and specialized art course, and we begged, borrowed, and pled with our teacher until he conceded that we could also carve waxes and cast them. So my first ring I have from then, I still have it. It has a giant air bubble under the head of the ring, but it didn't really affect how comfortable it was, so I just left it because at that time I didn't have any ball burrs, so I didn't get rid of it. And later on I was like, it was a learning experience, I'm leaving it. Yeah, I've got my first 2 cast objects, I think, maybe 3. And they are, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not brilliant, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're good for us. And yeah, I've been doing it ever since. It's kind of a very, very simple process that can go wrong as many ways as you can get creative and figure out new ones.
So working with this, they've developed kind of an arc. How do you
Yep.
straighten that out? Just get it warmish?
Yep, warm it up and flatten it out. Oh, okay, so yeah, I saw it when you held it the different direction. Yeah, just warm it up and hold it flat till it solidifies while it's flat. And hopefully it won't remember that it was a little bit bent before. Sometimes it's just through, the repeated drawing and redrawing. Sometimes it's what happens through distortion, and you have to flatten out that distortion again.
So question from the newbie here.
Mhm.
So back to the slideshow, the next step was to press this into clay and make a bunch of copies of it?
Yep. So if you have normal clay like you would use for ceramics, I got a little baggie here.
I've got some self-hardening clay.
Self-hardening clay is likely a polymer-based clay.
Oh no,
And
it's clay.
It's clay? Okay. Yeah, I did enough ceramics back in the day to be like stoneware, earthenware, and some other things. So if I was to want to make an impression, see the lump of clay there?
I do.
Okay, and I've got a wax, and it's a flat backed object that doesn't have any undercuts. What do I mean by undercuts? Let me draw it on the same piece of paper. So if I was casting a pendant that looks like a dome, that is easy to press down, follow the arrow,
Right.
into the wax. If that pendant had a shape like that, see those curved edges
Yeah, I get
under
it.
there, the clay would grab onto it.
Yeah, so my petals have undercuts and
Okay, then it won't work well. It will, if you're gentle and you still want a copy of it, you can press an object that has undercuts in it to the point where those recesses occur,
ah. Mm.
and then make sure that you pull up the clay at the back so that you can work on the back of it. But aside from that, the only quick tricks are sometimes a little bit of baby powder, and let's not breathe this stuff in because Johnson & Johnson has lots of lawsuits on that.
Would cornstarch work?
Cornstarch would probably work. It's just something to help break the seal between the clay and the wax. It doesn't stick too hard, but sometimes it can be a bit of a nuisance. I put the piece on it, and I firmly and evenly, and sometimes if there's thin areas, very supportively, squash it into the clay. Now this piece has very large hollow areas. They have not all filled well, but they still will have filled well enough that I'd be able to see it, where those areas need to then be drilled out and cleaned out. And then usually I use a tool with a bit of a pick. Sometimes you have to take the piece of clay and spread it out a bit so you can grab it. I may have had undercuts on this. Oh, not bad.
We're at 626 now.
And that is how to make a very simple impression. And then you pour molten beeswax, melted beeswax, into the form, allow it to cool, remove it, give it a scrubbing with a soft brush like a toothbrush or a stiff paintbrush, and then you work the details back into the wax.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
everybody. We
Yep.
are actually at the time where the next moderator will want to log in for the next section. So I thank you, Shannon, so much for the class, and thank you everybody for your patience in moderating the session.
Thank you all
We'll
for
see you
being here.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Scott.
Yes, thank you. That